Thank you, everybody. I'm going to call to order the meeting for Reinvestment Zone number 16, City of Houston. The first thing I'd like to do is call roll, and if you are on the call, please indicate. So I'm just going to go through the list. Robert Clay. Dot Cunningham. Ethel Johnson.
Here.
Steve Lerner is here. Kendall Miller. Judson Robinson.
Here.
Thank you. Louis Sklar.
Here.
Lisa Simon.
I think she's here.
I thought I heard Lisa.
I did too.
I'm sorry, I'm on mute. Lisa.
Yeah. Great. Mary Carmen.
Present.
Okay, so I think
has joined the conference.
I'm sorry, who just joined?
Kendall Miller, good afternoon.
Robert Clay. Excellent. Thank you,
has
Kendall.
Joined the conference.
Perfect timing. Kendall, Robert, thank you. I think it's just a matter to try to keep this working, that if everyone would keep their microphones on, keep them on mute unless you have, until you have something to say. Well, we're doing just great. Hi, Dot.
Hey there.
So keep it on mute. It'll prevent feedback and all sorts of other bad things from happening, and dogs too. But they really kind of help the meeting. So I'd like to just ask the Uptown staff to please identify themselves.
Sure. Bob Effington.
Stephen Wood. Andrew Jarridge.
Natalie Sarn.
Betsy Kirkgard.
Kalia Garvin. Shannon Daniels.
John Breeding.
Amy Escalante.
Great. Okay. And now, if there are any members of the public there, please identify yourselves, and we'll just do the best we can to get through everybody. So please, if you're not border staff and you're on the call, please identify yourself.
Monica Isidore with Finkley Barfield. Margaret Dunlap with Metro.
Rafael Ortega with Aurora Technical Services. This is Lauren Morales with RBC.
Any other members of the public on the call? Please let us know at this time.
Is Dr. Gilmer on the call yet?
Yes, I am on the line.
Okay, wonderful. Would you just go ahead for our purposes and just identify yourself?
Yes, I'm Bill Gilmer. I'm with the University of Houston, the Bauer College of Business.
Thank you. Thank you.
Terrific. So just a reminder for the rules of the conference. If you're speaking, please say your name first so we'll know who it is, and let's all mute our phones if we're not speaking. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Bob Effington.
Thank you, Steve. It's an honor for me to be able to introduce Dr. Bill Gilmer. He is the director of the Institute for Regional Forecasting at the University of Houston's Bauer College of Business. He has got a bio that is very distinguished, so I'll just pull some of the highlights from it. He served Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas for 23 years. He has been recognized in publications such as the Wall Street Journal, The Economist, and Forbes. He has a PhD in economics from the University of Texas at Austin. John Breeding and I were able to hear Dr. Gilmer's biannual economic symposium on webinar earlier this month, and we're so impressed with it that we asked him if he would join us for a few moments to kind of share the insights and summary of that, and he graciously accepted. Bill, what you don't know is I've been in contact with Patsy, your assistant, and I asked her if she were to introduce you, what she would say. And she said this: I can't really think of anything off the top of my head other than that you are sought after by journalists all over the country, local leaders as well, as a source of economic guidance and expertise. You're methodical, you're precise with your forecasts, as well as, and I thought this was great, being a joy to work for. So it's an honor for me to be able to introduce you, Dr. Gilmer.
Well, thank you. And thank you to Patsy as well. That was a very nice introduction. Thank you. I hope I can get through the slides fairly quickly today. I want to summarize what we talked about at the recent webinar, and hope we have plenty of time left for Q&A at the end. I'm going to start with slide 2. It's very important to emphasize right from the start that any kind of an economic outlook right now is purely a speculative business. I've used this analogy before, but the virus has the wheel of the car. The healthcare officials are riding shotgun over there, fumbling around looking for some sort of a map, and they have clearly not found it yet. And the rest of us, including the economy, are on this wild ride in the back seat, and I'm not quite sure exactly where it ends up. So far, the public officials have been unable to commit themselves to an infection rate, a mortality rate, tell us whether there's immunity, or tell us when we might see a treatment or vaccine so we would actually know when all of this is over. So without that, we really don't know the dimensions of this downturn. And the best I'm going to be able to do is offer some sort of scenarios and guidelines and some thoughts about what the economic structure of this whole event actually should look like. So, the early data we have so far shows a catastrophic short-run decline in employment, and it's driven to this point less by actual economic events and more by stay-home orders and enforced social distancing than anything else. And even as we start to reopen the economy, this uncharacterized virus that we're dealing with, we're just likely to see repeated rounds of stay-home orders and closings of non-essential business. So I just want you to understand that we're going to try to come up with some numbers and some figures, but how far you trust them, I'm going to leave strictly up to you. Slide 3 just tells us how an important past pandemic unfolded. This was the epidemic that went through the United Kingdom from 1918 to 1920, came in 3 waves. There was an early outbreak that came over the summer in 1918. Maybe that was our Seattle, for example. And then the epidemic spread widely over the winter. The worst period lasted about 3 months. Then came a smaller second wave later in the winter and spring, and that was kept in check by herd immunization. There was a period of serious infection and fear that spread over this about a 10-month period. If you look at slide 4, shows you 5 past pandemics, U.S. epidemics that we have experienced from 1918 up to 2009, 2010. The infection rates, the share of the population that contracts the disease, tells you the mortality or fatality rate is then the share of those who contract it and then die. Now, determining that case infection rate is very hard, even historically. Look at the range of what the case infection rate might have been in some of these past epidemics. And even with hindsight, it's quite wide. So you can understand how, as we're right in the middle of this and trying to get testing going, we really don't know much about what we're doing. And that 6% case fatality rate, again, is based on unknown factors, particularly exactly what that case infection rate might actually be. If you turn to slide 5, well, let me say one other thing before we get still on slide 4. These past pandemics offer us very little guidance about the future. The 1968-69 Hong Kong flu, for example, came well before the 1968-69 recession. Be very difficult to connect them up. The 2009-10 swine flu came just after the Great Recession. They can't be connected up. The Spanish flu came right on top of a major recession, but that major recession was mostly the demobilization from World War I. And they're related, and the timing's the same, but the depth of it can't really be tied together. And 57-58 actually works. It's one that coincides. The length and depth is about right, and so there we might actually be seeing a recession that could somehow be tied to a pandemic or epidemic. Now, to get some handle on this, given what little we knew and what few studies had been done in March, I borrowed from the Congressional Budget Office a study on the potential impacts of a downturn of an epidemic on the macroeconomy. What would it do to the U.S. economy? They were concerned about the bird flu at the time, which was an uncharacterized virus that might spread to the U.S. They had a base case that nothing really would happen to seasonal flu, a moderate case that said, well, the economy could slow down a bit. We would see no growth in this moderate case, or a severe case that looks much more like what we're seeing now. And I'm on slide 5 if I forgot to say that. But that severe case, it would be a typical U.S. recession with GDP falling about 2.8% and a fall in employment of about 3%. And it's important to understand how the CBO saw this unfolding. First, why a recession? And second, remember, this is history. There is no lockdown. There is no stay-home orders. This is an old-style epidemic that we're talking about. This old-style epidemic, pre-COVID-19, the illness spreads, and the recession is basically caused by extensive labor losses. Houston, at its peak, could conceivably lose, under the old rules, about 160 to 240,000 jobs in a typical week at the peak. During a peak period of 6 weeks or so, we could see as many as 250,000 people out of work, and that's what drove the downturn. Forced plant closings, reduced shifts, it hurt a lot of critical industries, and it disrupted a lot of supply chains, exactly what we're seeing, for example, in the meat industry and a lot of manufacturing right now.
Bill,
and then on top of that,
Bill, you lead us to page 6. I'm just trying to jump in. I apologize.
I'm sorry.
But you're now on page 6.
I'm sorry.
That's all right.
I'm on page 6. Plus, there was also some normal social distancing. Retail and restaurants saw their business hurt by this, for example. But there was not much of a forced shutdown. Occasionally, schools were closed. Occasionally, movie theaters, maybe crowd size limited, and everybody went to work during these events. And so this was how the CBO sort of saw this thing unfolding at the time, but things have changed. But if we just adopt this and take this as a starting point, you can turn to slide 7, and that shows you what would it mean for a COVID-19. Assuming we just adopt the CBO severe case, it would imply that here for the United States, if we take that severe case, we're talking about their 3% decline in employment and a 2.8% decline in GDP. Turn to slide 8, and slide 8 shows you if we just transfer that to Houston, what happens here in Houston. And here, I've just held, we've got another bigger problem in oil we're going to deal with here in a few minutes, another big problem at least in oil. But for the moment, let's just say, okay, oil stays somehow at $55 a barrel right through this recession. And if we transfer that to Houston, just with the U.S. recession only, we still would have in their relatively mild case that Asian flu example, very little job growth in Houston. And for the severe case that we're actually dealing with now, just the CBO case would have a loss of around 28,000 jobs. Now, okay, we're talking about the U.S. economy and the CBO case losing 4 or 5 million jobs, losing 27,000 jobs here in Houston. And if you turn to slide 9, you're going to see that we have already lost 335,000 jobs in Houston just in March and April. We have already lost 20 million jobs in the U.S. And it's fair to ask what happened. And the answer is that the rules changed with the stay-home mandated social distancing rules. We have to stay home if it's non-essential business. You can't go to the barber shop. You can't you can't go to a restaurant on down the list. You know the list as well as I do. But if you look at this particular list in slide 9, accommodation, air transportation, entertainment, food and drink, healthcare, other services, you have the industries that have been hurt the worst by this downturn and by the social distancing rules and by the stay-home rules. And they're 70% of the damage that we have seen in terms of job losses just in those service sectors. So, yes, the CBO foresaw some normal social distancing, but this is an add-on. This is something different than we have ever seen before. If you go to slide 10, it describes some of these differences. Certainly, the recent stay-home orders have their purpose has emphasized this need for social distancing to prevent the local hospital system from being overwhelmed. That also applies to critical industries, also such as public safety, utilities, for example. And it has certainly kept Houston's infection rate and mortality rate very low. If we just let the virus run through the economy under the old CBO rules, we'll call them, then we would have had 1.2 million cases in Houston over the life of this event, and as many as 35,000 local deaths. So so far we're talking about 10,000 cases in TIRZ County and maybe 210 deaths. So that counts, no question. However, there has been, on the economic side of the equation, we're talking about just from those sectors that I identified earlier, accommodation and entertainment and food and drink and so on, 20 million people who lost their job across the nation, and 220,000 here just in Houston. And the job losses now come earlier because we were waiting for the virus to move through the economy and peak. Now the job losses come earlier because of the enforced action from the public health authorities. And it also changes things in that we wouldn't see the kind of job losses because as this virus burns its way through the economy, most people are out of work for 2 weeks. A lot of people take that 2 weeks time, in the barrel, but most Americans actually have health care coverage for that 2 week period. So we wouldn't have seen this enormous switch to a public burden where people are out of 6 and 8 and more weeks, and 39 million Americans and 300,000 Houstonians literally on the dole. So very different round this time. We're doing something different. And if you look at slide 11, we're doing something different, but I want to emphasize that I'm going to come back in a minute to something that might actually still look like that CBO scenario once we cut through some of this. Slide 11, for example, if you look at the March and April job losses in Houston, that area that is in yellow, that is the selected services I showed you earlier. That's 225,000 jobs that are lost in those industries that are most sensitive to social distancing and the stay-home orders. But we also had losses in upstream oil, losses in professional and business services that totaled about 25,000 jobs, 28,000 in construction, 5,000 in finance, other manufacturing, and so on. But that green area at the bottom, I've sort of identified as the economic base in Houston. And that covers something like 39,000 jobs here and a small number of jobs. And those jobs are important. Those are the drivers of the local economy. And let me turn to slide 12 and explain this. I know some of you out there probably remember my predecessor at the University of Houston, Bart Smith. And Bart was a big believer in the economic base, constantly talking about oil's share of the economic base, for example, how much of Houston was driven by oil, how much by other factors. And Bart was onto something. And some ways it's rather a naive approach to doing this business, but it can be very insightful, both in the way Bart was using it and in the way I want to use it right now. When you talk about the economic base, you're talking about what makes the economy grow or what makes it shrink. What are the drivers of the business cycle? And to drive growth, a firm has to be able to sell its goods and services outside the region. It has to be able to reach outside this 9-county metro area into the rest of the state or the rest of the nation or the rest of the world and bring income back. Agriculture, manufacturing, and especially mining and oil in Houston are very important examples. They obviously can sell around the world. But also you can talk about companies that are not necessarily in oil, but basic. An AIG, a Fiscal, a Waste Management, a Men's Warehouse, all of these have headquarters here selling to the rest of the to the rest of the U.S. and part of that economic base as a result. Then you have what are called the non-basic industries. The non-basic are secondary activities. They're inherently local. They do not typically sell their goods or services outside the region. They're sold to the rest of the country. Go back to that list on slide 11 where we're talking about entertainment, food and drink, healthcare, other services, private education, retail. Those are sales that are made to, for the most part, to other Houstonians, not to the rest of the country. And so these are not the drivers of the economy. They don't bring, it's not that they're not important, it's just that they're not driving growth and making growth happen. If you look at slide 13, I tried to total up this economic base, and there are sort of standard ways to do this. Sort of a practitioner's manual on how you calculate the economic base and do these calculations. And I just went through the routine calculations for Houston over the last 30 years, back to 1990. And if you look at slide 13 on the left side, you see 5 events that we've seen major downturns. They're described on the right side of the slide. The 1990 and 2001 recession, the Asian financial crisis, the fracking bust, the Great Recession, and so on. And they tell us how much this economic base, the drivers of the economy, these underlying fundamentals were actually important to the business cycle. And what you see is on average, over those last 5 downturns that we saw here in Houston, we had about 58,000 jobs lost in the base on average, about an 11% decline. And oil's part of the losses was about 48%, about half attributable to oil historically. And what we're seeing this time with this downturn, which actually began last November, we began to see the base decline because of the collapse in the rig count in late last year. And now we're talking about 46,000 jobs lost, 8.8% decline, 44% oil. It looks like a pretty typical recession. It looks like kind of like an average downturn here in Houston, at least at this point. And it looks like the CBO's sense of the business cycle might not actually be that crazy after all. What we're talking about, as you turn to the next slide, is what these stay-home orders have done. And the stay-home orders have mostly worked in these secondary sectors, very low multipliers, and certainly not anything that drives the economy. They wouldn't have declined without a lot of help from the public health authorities. It's as simple as that. So, as we talk about the business cycle, we've got the illness and disruptions. We've got what would have been, even without any orders, we know there's going to be some social distancing in restaurants and bars and retail and so on. But then on top of that, we've got the stay-home orders and the enforced rules on social distancing in barbershops and bars, for example. So as we lift these orders, we basically work back to where what is left is the CBO version with the historical recession and some normal social distancing. So I have no idea how this is going to play out. No one does. The public health authorities don't have any clue. So I made up some numbers to illustrate exactly what could happen in this case. For example, there's a calendar in slide 14. This calendar in slide 14 says that we're going to see 250,000 job losses if these jobs are, if we see stay-home orders reinstated. 250,000 jobs lost. It's what we saw in April in those social distancing sectors, and suppose it comes back in late June and July. I don't really know. And the rest of the time, without the stay-home orders, we're still dealing with social distancing. In May, maybe 150 or 100. Well, actually, we're in the yellow, which is sort of an intermediate period right now between no stay-home orders and stay-home orders. We're lifting them slowly. And then ultimately we wind up with no orders, but still good social distancing continues, perhaps costing us first 100,000 in jobs, and if we get into September and October, the social distancing recedes, and ultimately by the end of the year there's no social distancing. Now I clearly made that up. I don't know what's going to happen, but if that's what did happen, if you look at slide 15, what you see is what you see in that blue line is the typical CBO recession working its way through Houston. And that yellow-orange line, at least on my chart, that yellow-orange line turns out to be the impact of the stay-home orders coming and going. And so you see these enormous swings in the economy, primarily in the secondary, non-basic sectors. We're allowed to just add those on in regional analysis. And we come out at the end, by the time we get to the end of 2021, I'm pretending that the event is largely over. There's no more social distancing, no more stay home, and we're working our way out of a normal recession here in Houston that has lasted about 5 quarters, and we're beginning to go back to normal, still working our way back to normal growth until we get into 2022. So you kind of picture what is ultimately the impact of a modest recession sort of working its way, burning its way through Houston, but at the same time we're getting these wild and crazy numbers that are driven by the kind of stay-home orders we have never seen before. So we'll get back to putting that together and with the rest of the economy here. But first, let me say a word about oil. And, the oil problem we have right now, we would a few weeks ago been talking about credit crunches and oil wars between the Russians and the Saudis. That has been completely overcome by COVID-19. Global demand, thanks to COVID, global demand for oil, normally about 100 million barrels per day, fell below 80 million barrels per day with the combination of the shutdown orders in China, in Europe, and the United States, and all of the concern about credit crunch. And the credit crunch is certainly still there. but the Russians and the Saudis and OPEC and the U.S. are now on board trying to clear this massive glut of oil that's been created. There has been very substantial progress in stabilizing the market. I'm sure most of you saw the minus $37 a barrel for oil with that May NYMEX contract, which was a sort of a perversion. But at the same time, we did see the June contract, that was the May contract at minus 37. The June contract did roll over at about a plus $30 a barrel. And WTI this morning was standing at around $33 per barrel and has been there for several days. Consensus expectations right now are that we'll clear the glut and be dealing with some poor fundamentals in the oil market beginning in the fall. We'll probably be up to $40 and $45 a barrel oil for most of the.
I think we may have lost it.
Hello?
Hello?
Bill, is that you?
Hello?
We hear
Yes,
you.
this is me. I'm still.
Okay, we hear you.
Okay, all right. We're now trying to clear that massive glut of oil, and the price of oil looks like it'll probably be through next year at at around $45 per barrel. If you turn to slide 17, just some quick calculations on oil jobs here in Houston. We've already lost about 20,000 jobs here in Houston, 20,500 according to the latest data. This includes losses in the second half of that last year, losses early this year, and then the most recent losses we have seen in March and April with COVID. So we've seen about 20,000 jobs lost. I expect to see probably another 10 or 11, despite the fact that the price has probably bottomed out. Probably a loss of around 30,000 jobs overall before we're through. And if you look at slide 18, those numbers, 31,000 jobs, doesn't sound good, especially if one of them's yours. But at the same time, those numbers make me much more optimistic. There is tremendous pessimism about the future of fracking in the United States. I think that is completely misplaced. The price of oil goes back to $60 a barrel, and if we return to 100 million barrels a day, which is where we were at in March, we have to have fracking in Canadian oil sands to make that work. So it may not be quite the industry that we have seen in the past, but the idea that fracking is going to disappear is just sadly misplaced at this point in time. And in terms of the jobs, we went into this downturn with the industry very, very lean because of the problems they have experienced already before COVID, with the credit issues, with low oil prices, with the 25% decline in the rig count already behind them. The industry is extremely lean. The bigger producers are holding on to jobs. Now, the big service companies, as that rig count collapses around them, not so much. But I'm quite optimistic that we're going to see the return of those oil jobs as price comes back up. And let me close with the next couple of slides on sort of totals for Houston. I will, over the next couple of weeks, modify these, and I'll make sure everybody gets a link gets a link to this so we can get any modified numbers. It'll be a continuous process of modifying these numbers, I'm afraid. But if we're going to pull things together for Houston's job growth, a recession is almost certainly underway. It's just, anytime you talk about a significant downturn that involves many sectors, involves businesses and consumers, involves all parts of the country, then yes, it's a recession. I don't think we need to debate that. I don't really think anyone does. Oil prices, as I said, we expect to stay near $40, $45 a barrel through 2022 and then return to normal. And what we're going to see is really a double recovery. As the national economy recovers first in 2021, Houston gets a big boost. And then as oil prices come back in 2022, we get a second boost. So in the same way, everyone talks about this double blow for Houston from the national economy and oil. On the upside, we get a nice pickup with a double boost as we move through 21 and 22. As I said, the industry is quite lean in oil, and we should see a very, very nice recovery. All of this assumes that the monetary and fiscal stimulus really serves as the bridge from a pre-COVID world to a post-COVID world, that there's not permanent damage to the American oil industry by a long period of $40 oil, and the Houston economy really returns to its long-term growth rate, which has been a very healthy 2% for 40 years. If all of that happens, then in slide 20, you can see 2020, through a combination of that CBO recession and some continued natural social distancing at the end of the year, about 25,000 jobs, we would still be down fourth quarter to fourth quarter, something like 80,000 jobs. So it's a significant and meaningful downturn for Houston. It turns around in the second quarter. We bring back around 40,000 jobs in 2020, and then things really pick up as oil comes back again, and we have a couple of very good years, actually touching on 100,000 jobs per year in 2022, as both the U.S. comes back strongly and oil comes back strongly, just at the same time. So this outlook's probably much more optimistic than a number of others, and I have to again tell you that the virus knows best. It could be, if the virus wants it, this could be a deeper and longer downturn, and if there's no vaccine or no treatment, it could be a much longer downturn. We simply don't know. And you're welcome to make up your own outlook based on the kind of assumptions that I've made here. With that, do we have time for some questions and answers?
We could take a few moments. Mr. Chairman, anyone else on the board have a question they'd like to ask Dr. Gilmer? Dr. Gilmer, I have two questions. One, with the Fed's policy in making funds available, are you at all concerned about inflation? And number two, do you have any ability to speculate about what this means for ad valorem property values in Houston?
Well, in terms of inflation, no, I'm not worried about that. I think at this point in time, given the fear factor above all, that no, this was exactly what needed to be done, and what needed to be done at the right time. If there is a concern on the part of the Fed, I think they would tell you, we know how to control inflation. We've done it in the past. Sometimes it's some difficult medicine, but fixing deflation, where we wind up with prices falling, very, very difficult to fix. Deflation, you wind up with negative interest rates. Deflation, people in debt wind up with their debt growing rapidly, even because the dollars they're trying to pay it off with are worth less. It turns into a terrible trap. So the Fed's concern above all right now is deflation. I've also had a number of questions about, what this means for the national debt in the long term. The short answer is absolutely nothing good. And we should have worried about that a long time ago. But, if you've got the house is on fire, you worry about the termites in the basement later. And it would be good if we actually worried about the termites this time. But right now, the house is literally on fire. We do need this bridge to carry us to the pre-COVID to a post-COVID world. the ad valorem taxes in Houston, that's pretty much the province of the appraisal district, I will be honest. However public policy chooses to work is where we're going to come out. Clearly, we can see a lot of pressure on real estate values right now, running right from office buildings, which were seriously overbuilt before we started, thousands of small businesses that are having difficulty paying their rent, homeowners difficulty paying their mortgages. I'm sure there's going to be enormous pressure, public pressure brought to bear for some sort of a relief on ad valorem ad valorem values. But how that works out is anybody's guess at this point in time. I really don't know.
Mr. Chairman, I turn it back to you. If any of the board members have a question, I'll let. Would you run it? Would you lead that process?
Sure. Does anybody have a question for Dr. Gilmer? I have one question I'd like to ask, which is, we talked a lot about the price of oil. What about the price of natural gas and where natural gas fits in Houston, Texas?
Well, natural gas has been a secondary issue for some time. You know, it's easy to forget, but before, say, probably 2006, 2007, 80% of the drilling in the United States was directed to natural gas. And then since over the last 12 years, 15 years, it's been 80% directed to oil. The immediate answer for natural gas is that a lot of oil is being shut in. And that shut-in of oil is also shutting in a lot of associated natural gas. So a lot of gas that normally would be flared or would go into the pipeline is simply being shut in right along with the oil. And I think it was thought that we were going to get a big boost in gas prices, natural gas prices, as that natural gas was shut in. But then it also turns out that much of that natural gas, I've forgotten the exact percentage, something like 30 to 40% now, goes to LNG to be shipped to the rest of the world. And that market is drying up. And American natural gas at current prices is more expensive than Russian or a lot of other European natural gas. And so we've got sort of a two-way whipsaw going where on the one hand both supply and demand are falling, but most people think the price of natural gas is just going to fall back. Most of the big investment houses were initially quite optimistic about gas prices, but they have really pulled back on that and think natural gas won't be a big driver here in the short run for improving the outlook for drilling, for example.
Thank you very much. Okay, any other questions from board members? Well, Dr. Gilmer, thank you very much. That was very insightful, and we look forward to getting updates. We all continue to be highly interested.
Well, thank you. Anytime I can help you guys, just let me know. Thanks. It's a pleasure.
Thank you again.
Bye-bye.
Okay.
Bill Gilmer
has left the conference.
We're going to return to our agenda, and the first item is to approve the minutes from the March 25th meeting. And I'd like a motion to approve the minutes.
Lisa, make a motion to approve the minutes.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
Mary Carmen, second.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Say aye. Any opposed? Thank you. The motion carries. So now we're going to suspend the Reinvestment Zone 16 City of Houston meeting, and we will call to order the Uptown Development Authority meeting, and please bear with me, we do have to go through the same process of identifying everybody. So first we'll call the board member roll call, so please unmute for a minute or two so we can hear you. Robert Clay? Here. Doc?
Here, Francis.
Ethel Johnson?
Here.
Steve Lerner is here. Kendall Miller?
Here.
Judson Robinson?
Still here.
Terrific. Louis Sklar?
Here.
Lisa Simon?
Present.
Mary Carmen Tamez?
Present.
Okay, terrific. Now let's go through the staff members as well, please, if you'll identify yourselves.
Bob Ethington.
Stephen Wood.
Andrew Jarrett.
Natwani Sarn,
Betsy Kirkgard,
Kalia Garvin, Shannon Daniels,
John Breeding.
Amy Escalante,
Carolyn McCain.
Mike Williams.
That is all.
Okay, that's everybody from the staff. In terms of the public, again, if you're a member of the public and you haven't otherwise been identified, please let us know who you are at this time.
Margaret Dunlop with Metro. Monica Espadero with Binkley and Barfield.
Mel Emanuel, ABHR. Lauren Morales with RBC.
Rafael Ortega with Aurora Technical Services.
Anybody, any other public members? Okay. Thank you, everybody. Our next order of business is to receive any comments or questions from the public. Does anyone wish to make any comments at this time? Okay, hearing none, we will move on to the next item, which is to approve the minutes of the March 25th meeting. I'd like a motion from someone to approve the minutes, please.
Approved.
Second.
Dot Cunningham.
Thank you. All in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, the next item is to approve invoices, and I'm going to turn it over to Shannon Daniels. Shannon?
Okay, thank you. If you turn to page 4 of your package, you'll see we have the summary of invoice approvals for roughly 2 months, March and April. The top part is HCID reimbursements, roughly $200,000 for project management due to the district and miscellaneous costs. We also have roughly $200,000 for professional services associated with the Post Oak Boulevard project. On page 5, you'll see that we have Development Authority contracts and work orders, just over $580,000, again, roughly 2 months of services, totaling just over $980,000 for professional services, work orders, and contracts. If you look at the bottom section, we have just over $1.9 million for our construction contract pay application request, again for 2 months, and for a total of just over $2.9 million that we are presenting for approval for you today. Also, just for a little bit more information, pages starting on page 6, going through page 9. It's just a little bit more information for the services that we're presenting to you on that Excel format. You'll see subcontractors as well, who are DBEs, and like I said, just a little bit of blurb of the services they're providing. Do we ask for a motion to approve now?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Mr. Chairman, we need a motion to approve
Yes.
payment.
Can we have a motion to approve these invoices for payment, please?
So moved, Judson.
Second.
Second, Lisa Simon.
Thank you. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
May I ask just one
Any oppo-
question? Okay.
Sure.
Let's SBE, is that Small Business Enterprise? Is that what that stands for?
Yes, ma'am.
And what constitutes small? Is that
Ms. Simon, I don't know exactly. I do know that the city of Houston distinguishes between small businesses, and we do get credit for that, as well as minority and disadvantaged businesses. There is less credit given for small businesses than there is the DBE, I know, and how they calculate the percentages. But what I do know is that I'll get that number for you, but you can graduate out of it. For instance, we do have somebody that I was just talking to our contractor, Raytech, because the work that they're doing for Metro, Pfeiffer is a big contractor, a subcontractor, and on the City of Houston's website, they're still shown as an SBE, and so I was actually questioning the contractor why I didn't see that. But they've actually graduated out of that program, so I can get more information and let you know what the criteria is. But yeah, there is a limit.
Sure you got more important things to do. I was just curious.
No, but it's a good question, and it's something
and it's set by the City of Houston, and it changes over time. The number goes up, but I don't know exactly what it is either. So we can tell you. We'll find out.
I'll get that.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so I think we had a motion and a second to approve the invoices for payment. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, the motion passes. And we'll turn it back to Shannon to review the Mwdbe report.
Thank you, sir. On page 10, you see the summary. The top section shows the cumulative DBE expenditures and goals from inception to April 2020. Our professional goal is 24%. Inception to date, we're at 39%. Our construction goal, 17%. And to date, we're at 21%. The bottom half of page 10 shows our performance for this fiscal year. So for the current fiscal year, we're at 53% for professional services, over a 24% goal, and we're at 15% for construction, over a 17% goal. I would note that that has gone down a little bit because we're at the end of the project for a lot of it, and so most of the pay applications have already included the DBE, and these final ones that you're seeing are like the retainage. It's like doing the punch list, and we're making the final payment, so that explains that. The next couple of pages you'll see is a little bit more detail, like who's the prime and who are the subs that are getting paid. And then lastly, on pages 14, 15, are some graphical depictions of those percentages over the fiscal year. Page 15 is a more breakdown for our professional services and how the DBE breaks down. 17 again is construction goal, 15%. You can see the prime contractors along with their subs and the amount that has been paid. And then lastly, page 18 is a construction chart for the percentages over this fiscal year.
I would add to this is that as we move forward toward the end of this fiscal year, we will be awarding significant construction contracts, and that number will grow significantly. We'll cover that in a subject here coming up in our next section.
Okay, and John, I'm assuming we do not need to approve this. This is for review purposes only. Is that correct?
That's correct. It's for informational purposes.
Perfect. All right, so let's go on to the next item, which is to review and consider approving the fiscal year 2021 budget. I'll turn it back to John for that.
All right, thank you very much. If you will turn to page 19, tab 2, in your scrolling there, it begins with FY 2021 proposed budget. The board of directors essentially approves a budget to be submitted to the city of Houston, and it is actually the Houston City Council that will approve the budget. And we are presenting to you today what we are recommending presenting to the city of Houston. If the city council makes any material changes in their approval, we would bring that information back to you. So just a little bit about the process. If I could ask you to look at page 19, this is something we started last year at the request of Kendall Miller. Very informative, and it talks about the revenues that our TIRZ receives and how where those funds go. If you'll look from a revenue perspective, you see that the City of Houston tax revenue of about $30.5 million, HISD revenue of $18 million. So the subtotal for the TIRZ, for the UDA, is over $50 million this coming fiscal year. But then we see what happens with those funds. A third of the funds that we collect from HISD goes back to HISD for educational facilities, $5.9 million. Affordable housing funds from HISD and from the City of Houston go to affordable housing, and that totals almost $16 billion, $15.5 million. And then the City of Houston tacks on an administration fee of $1.6 million, and then a City of Houston municipal services fee of $5.5 million. Total revenue, basically before we start paying debt service. So we started out with $50 million, and we're now down to $28.5 million. We have existing debt service equal to about $17 million per year, and that leaves revenue available for projects of only $5 million. And so just to give you some sense where that $50 million goes and what remains for us to actually try to undertake significant projects.
Hey, John?
Yes, sir.
Robert, those numbers don't add up correctly. 28.5 minus 17, unless I'm missing something, is 11.5 million, not 5 million.
Well, we have a typo if that's the case.
I think you did.
We did have typo.
And Shannon will give us that correction right real quick, and I appreciate that. That's correct.
Yeah, that 28 is 21.5. It's not 20. It's 21.5. Is the revenue that you have available before. And so when then you subtract the 17 million, and that gives you the 28.5 should be 21.5.
But that doesn't give you 5 million. It gives you 4.5. Shannon,
my apologies. It's rounding and trying to get the 0.5s, but once we subtract all of the takeaways, the roughly 5.9 million for HISD, the 15.5 that we give to affordable housing, the 1.6 that we give to for the administration fee, plus the 5.5, that is 28 plus minus the 50. It's 22 minus, yeah, it's 22.
On the rounding?
Yes, it's 22, and you subtract the 17, and then you get 5. So it's not 21.5. All those numbers with the credits, that's 22 million. And then you subtract the 17.
It gives you the 5.
Yeah.
I apologize.
I apologize for that. It was an oversight on our part as we prepared these charts.
Delia isn't here today, so we could blame it on Delia.
No, we won't blame it on Delia. I'll take credit for the numbers. Thank you for, I appreciate your attentiveness to the information that we give you.
Mr. Clay, thank you. If I could then ask you to turn to page 20. We have a beginning fund balance for this year, ending fund balance for FY 2020 of $3 million. We take the revenues, if I could just go over these very quickly, bringing the $5 million from the previous page. We're working with the City of Houston and City Councilman Greg Travis on a storm drain project, and we hope to work out the details of getting $1 million a year to help do some improvements, Mr. Clay, that we're all interested in on the northern part of the boulevard. That's not finalized, but we think that's in the works. We have a developer in the area, in the general area of Richmond and Post Oak Boulevard, who's willing to upfront fund the reconstruction of Richmond with about $6.5 million this coming year. And then as we get into the Memorial Park project, we see Memorial Park Conservancy contributing $11.5 million, and then we're bringing in 10.5 from notes that we currently have approved by the board and have funding for. I hope the subtotal revenue is $34.5 million. Shannon, you better run ahead of me in all these calculations. Funds available for capital expenditures, $37.5. And then we'll go into the details of this, but we're planning a capital budget of $34.5 million for this coming year. And we'll go into that detail, leaving us a projected ending cash balance in June 30 of 2021 of $3 million. Turning to page 21, we summarized this. We have traditionally presented our budget to the board of directors in this format. We have core projects, which we frequently refer to those projects within the core, the commercial area. That might be a Richmond Street construction, or it might be some other project in the sort of the commercial area, projected for this coming year of $10.05 million. The regional transit projects, which a couple of years ago was $80 million expenditure. We're just the Post Oak Boulevard and the Transit Center project and payments are declining rapidly, down to less than $1 million for the next fiscal year. While the Memorial Park project, and particularly the Land Bridge project, at $21.95 million for total expenditures, $32.9. That's not the 34 from the previous page. The difference is miscellaneous, basically staff charging the capital projects and some developer agreements and payments to previous ones. But the majority of that $1.6 million is actually staff charges. Turning to page 22, looking at a 5-year capital improvement program for the core projects, I think this speaks clearly. Let me say there's two things that are guiding us at this point. We have an absolute commitment to finish up the Post Oak Boulevard and Transit Center projects, and we have an absolute commitment to do the Land Bridge project in Memorial Park. And you will, and the third guiding element of all this is that we are uncertain what the growth in ad valorem tax revenue is over the next 5 years. We have projected an extremely conservative forecast here, and as you can see, if you would just look at the total on core projects, those core projects totaling 10.50 this fiscal year is made up of a 6.5 that will be a developer agreement, and then a project that we're working with the City of Houston on funding of $2.5 million. The rest of the numbers, that's almost $9 million of the 1050, and that just shows you how our program is falling in terms of core projects. And then as you look out to the right, we're doing some engineering design, but we're really waiting for a new development to occur and hopefully recovery of the ad valorem value in the area. Turning to page 23, presents the transit portion of this, less than $1 million in 2021. We have a final payment to be made to TxDOT for projects like the West Loop. $5 million that we're projecting in 20. Probably it will actually occur in 23, in fiscal 23. And then if you turn to page 24, you begin to see where the real money is being expended is in the Memorial Park projects. The first heading there of $1.4 million is basically ecological restoration and green space maintenance. We then have a focused effort for this coming year on the land bridge of $21 million that has both funding from the TIRZ and the Memorial Park Conservancy, and then some very light engineering and planning work for trail work connecting Uptown to the park. You'll see that number grow as we begin to look at over the next 5 years, hoping to see some growth in the growth in the ad valorem value in the area. Again, if you'll look at the Memorial Park infrastructure, which is primarily the land bridge project, you can see that's the heart of where we will be spending our money. On page 25 is a cash summary, a projection of beginning and ending cash balances given these capital programs and projected revenues. And we show that over the 5-year period that we believe that with the current information, we have a financially sound projection, but it is nothing a significant excess. Last thing, just noting on page 26 and 27, a summary of the 5-year program. We'll be spending $15 million on core projects, $5.9 million on regional transit, and really $80 million, almost $81 million on Memorial Park, for $102 million over the next 5 years. And that's a significant investment. Looking at page 27, of what we've invested in Memorial Park since 2013, of $34 million, so 75, almost 76 million. Just want to make note the difference between that 76 million that we're putting in and the total $102 million was the difference of the Memorial Park Conservancy and their contribution for the land bridge, which is actually 57% of the cost of that project. I know I ran through this fairly quickly. I'll be glad to attempt to answer any of your questions. Mr. Chairman, it is our hope that the board would approve this for submittal to the City of Houston for their review and acceptance. Are we there?
I think we did lose the call.
I think we lost the call.